you naughty, naughty, naughties! What am I going to do with you?
Well, hello, welcome to the video. This one's about 5 more amazing bands from the 1980s that you should know about. These are all people that I have got personal experience of. Otherwise, what would be the point of me making a video? And most of that came from my time at the Cricketers Kennington Oval, which is a music pub, one of the second wave of music pubs in the 1980s. And the Cricketers was at Kennington Oval, which, if you didn't know, was just over the river from the West End of London, southeast London, in fact, SE11. I remember the postcode was SE115LG. So that's a memory for you after 40 odd years, isn't it? Blimey. Anyway, the first band I'm going to talk about are the Primitives.
Here you go, way too fast. Don't slow down, you're gonna crash.
They definitely played there on September the 11th, 1986, because there's a video which has been on YouTube for ages. They weren't that famous then. They were down from Coventry. They played a lot of London venues back then. I think they played more than once, because I can remember I got to know PJ and Tracy were the two people I can remember. I can't remember who else was in the band. I'm sorry about that, but it is, as I say, 40 odd years ago. Is it 40 years ago? Well, 30 odd years ago. It's a long time ago. And the Primitives are one of those strange bands, because at the time, in the 1980s, it was anything went kind of thing, because like, we were trying to put on cutting edge bands, if you like, because after 1976, when punk came along and tore up all the rule books, everything changed. You could be an indie band that played pop songs. You could be a pop band that played indie. It was like, there was so much happening. It was a really exciting time. And this is the second wave, as I say, of the pub rock thing. And the Cricketers, together with places like the Bull and Gate and the Dublin Castle and places like that, were at the cutting edge of this exciting revolution in music. And the Primitives were one of the most iconic bands of that time, because they exemplified everything that I'm talking about, really. The fact that they were a pop band, well, they were an indie band that played pop music, and they later had a hit called Crash, which became very big. I think it got number 5 in the British charts, and unusually, it was a hit in the States as well, and all over Europe, and I think Australia too. And it became even more famous when it was featured in the film Dumb and Dumber a few years later, I think in the mid-90s, whenever that came out.
Words of sympathy, and if I go around with you.
Well, it was described at the time in the Melody Maker as the perfect pop song by the perfect pop band. I'm not sure that the Primitives would go along with that, because they did try to be more cutting edge, more exciting than just a pop band. A lot of their songs were very catchy. They were, I say jangly, if that's not, I'm not saying jangly in a nasty way, I'm saying jangly in a good way. And they were very enjoyable. They weren't one of my favourite bands, but I liked the people in the band and they were great. There were lots of bands like that at the time. There was the Lucy Show. There was, I can't remember all of them, but there were lots of bands which I thought were really good and very jangly, poppy stuff, which I wouldn't normally like. But as I say, in the 1980s, anything went. So who's the next band we're going to talk about? The next band I'm going to talk about is Here and Now.
Taking your advantage. Don't take me for granted.
In 1979, I think it was, 1980 maybe, I was approached by a friend of mine who was a guy called Trevor Evan Jones, who I mentioned in a previous video, who I went along to see about being his manager. I put an advert in the Melody Maker saying experienced manager. So this was probably in the early 1970s. And one of the people that answered it was Trevor. And within a few minutes of meeting him, it became obvious that he ought to be managing me. But anyway, he went on to be a record producer. Well, he was a record producer. He was in a band called Jonesy, came from Australia. And they basically won the Golden Rose of Montreux and stuff like that. And he'd produced an album for a band called Here and Now. And it was called Fantasy Shift. And it was a change from what they'd done previously. Because Here and Now were known as they were known as a hippie band. They'd done free gig tour. They toured Britain with alternative TV, which Here and Now were known for being a hippie band, to put it. They hated that, actually, but they were known as that. And alternative TV, ATV, were, new wavy punk bands. That they weren't pure punk, they were an intelligent punk band. Here and Now had done this fantastic album and they wanted me to be there. I think my manager or agent, I can't remember now. I think I became a bit of each because I was never really into being one thing or another thing. I was more into being like an extra member of the band, if you know what I mean, who didn't go on stage. That was more the way I looked at how I did my job. But I was in charge of getting them gigs and things like that, and it was pretty, well, it wasn't, I mean, the music press at the time were very conscious of being trendy. Bands like Here and Now and the Enid, which I think we may mention a bit later, never got really mentioned because they weren't in vogue, even though Here and Now could pull, I mean, we were booking them into places I remember they did West Horton Sports Centre, which held about 1,500 people, and they practically filled it. And then they played at Salford University, which had a big hall at the time, and they filled that. And they were doing London shows upstairs at the Clarendon, especially at Christmas time, which held about 800, and they filled that. And they were playing like spacey rock, I suppose you call it, upbeat. There was Keith, the bass, who was on the bass, obviously. There was Gavin, who played keyboards and sang. But by the time I got to know them, that the guitarist was a guy called Dino Ferrari, and there was a drummer called Paul. The original band, if you know what I mean, the band before that had a guy called Steffi Sharpstrings on the guitar, and he rejoined the band later, because I had a very tumultuous time with Here and Now. Even though we got to be great friends, Keith, Gavin and I especially, a lot of the band, like Keith and Gavin, lived in a big house in Kingston, and I moved in there and there was a bit of a bust up and Keith left and went to live somewhere else, and it got a bit fraught, and Dean lived in New Cross, which was more my sort of area, frankly, because I was more southeast London. But I went to live in Kingston for a while and it was all very exciting. I honestly don't remember much about it. I remember at one stage we bought a cassette duplicating machine. Well, at least I did. I think Bob Kerr and I bought this thing. Because in those days, cassettes was a thing. I mean, it was vinyl and cassettes, and they had a lot of success with cassettes that they put out themselves. They were like usually DIY band. They were one of those bands that did everything themselves. They put out their own cassettes. Coaxed Out from Oxford, a bit naughty title, isn't it, was their big cassette. And I think that's the one that we duplicated, and they had lots of friends involved. It was all very exciting, and we eventually fell out at some stage. I can't remember what happened. But we still stayed in touch. Like Keith did the door for me at the Cricketers, and they went on to great things after me, and they eventually broke up in 1997. Gavin sadly died, but his daughter has done a video about those days, and I'll try and put a link in the description, and that's basically me and Here and Now.
I'm addicted to coffee, addicted to tea. I think cigarettes are addicted to me. Beta, gamma, hubba dubba.
And I'll do a proper one about them, but I thought I ought to mention them because I've not really mentioned them in the videos. And they were a very powerful part of my life at that time. And the arch enemy, if you like, well, not really, but the one we used to keep battling against when I was trying to get them gigs. Everywhere we went, we were beaten to it, or they said, oh, we've got the Enid. I didn't see the Enid. I had no idea who the Enid were. We joked about them in Here and Now, but I'd never seen them, never heard them, so I didn't really know. And it was a while, it was after we'd fallen out with Here and Now, that I got to see them. And even though to me, it's not my kind of thing, it's more prog than Here and Now were, to be honest with you. And of course, needless to say, the main guy, who's called Robert Godfrey, went to some sort of public school. At this stage, just very quickly, if you're not already subscribed, it would be great if you could subscribe. It would really help me. Like this video and share it with your friends. Anyway, let's get on with the music. Robert Godfrey formed the Enid in 1973 when, well, with his friends, most notably Francis Licorice, I think his name was, who'd been with him at this weird school where wayward, posh children were sent, and this is where they met. Robert Godfrey, after that, went to, I think, the Royal School of Music. A lot of his things in the Enid were like pastiches of classical music and operatic. Here and Now and the Enid both played at free festivals such as Stonehenge, and that's really where they got in this weird contest of who was best, or who was the real band of this sort of thing. Now, I might be making all of this up, but this is just my impression from the time. And as I say, I didn't see the Enid till quite later on, and then when I did see them, I thought they were quite interesting, actually. It's his show now, and it was, I think I saw them, late 80s, was it? Early 90s, and they didn't even do vocals for quite a long time. I think it was their 5th album before they did vocals, because the reason was that their vocalist, because they originally had a vocalist, he committed suicide on New Year's Eve sometime, I think it was 1975 or something like that. As a result of that, Robert Godfrey refused to do vocals. Then eventually the drummer of the time decided to write a few vocals, and Robert sang them, but in a very strange style. I quite like the Enid, and if you like them, well, check them out if you haven't already seen them. I think they're quite an unknown band from the 1980s, like Here and Now, like all the other ones I mentioned here, that you definitely check out their music. And another one is Zoot and the Roots. This is a bit more obscure. Basically, there was a guy, a sax player called Snake Davis, who went on to greatness. I'll come to that shortly. And one of the bands he played with in the early days when I was at the Cricketers was a band called Zoot and the Roots. The band came down to London and they did shows, as I say, at the Cricketers, usually Sunday lunchtime, but eventually they graduated from that to doing headline shows. They came from York, though Snake Davis, I believe, went to college in Leeds, where he learnt all his craft, and they were very exciting. Well, you know, I'm a bit of a sucker for big band style arrangements, especially when they apply to rock and blues and things like that. And they were spectacularly good. And Snake Davis went on to play sax. I think he's famously known for playing with M. People and Lisa Stansfield, but he's played with some of the greats of our time, including Paul McCartney, James Brown, and people I can't remember. So check out Zoot and the Roots and Snake Davis. And finally, we're going to talk about the Blue Aeroplanes. They're a band from Bristol, an indie band that played quite a lot at the Cricketers. They're one of our favourites. They used to pull quite a few people. And they had a quirky style. Their lead singer, Gerard, always wore dark glasses on stage, even back then, even though I don't think he had any problems with his eyes. It was like a style thing. And they were energetic. They went on stage and they really went for it. As I say, the Blue Aeroplanes were one of the best bands of that time. They were very independent, they were very exciting. They didn't stick to one type of thing. They were experimenting all the time, and I thought they were really good. And they were, again, they were a bit jangly, but not overly jangly. And they went off, and they're still going now. They're still playing to this day, I believe. I haven't seen them for, probably 30 years. But interesting enough, when I was towards the end of my career as an agent, when I was working with people like the Pretty Things, the Ruttles featuring Neil Innes, and the Magic Band with John Drumbo French, Captain Beefheart's Magic Band, one of the venues we used to enjoy putting acts into, and they always were very good. And Chris from the Blue Aeroplanes was the guy I used to speak to booking the bands. The Fleece in Bristol, which is the Blue Aeroplanes venue, and it's a very fine venue. And everybody I ever represented as an agent loved playing at the Bristol Fleece. So there you go. Well, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, here's a video you might enjoy next time, so go for that one. Cheers.